Hi, here we are, wandering aloud once again in my gallery. When we were younger, well, if you're like me, our lives are kind of handily mapped out. You go to primary school, you leave, you move on to secondary school, and each different phase comes in sort of discrete chunks and represents an opportunity to reinvent yourself, to build on what you've done before, but essentially to start again. So primary school, secondary school, university, perhaps graduate studies, although that didn't really work out too well for me. And it's a handy system because you don't need to think about what exactly you're doing. I mean, you have decisions to make, choices that are available to you. But the broad structure of your life is convenient, done for you, and suggests a way forward. So you can build momentum. I know this isn't true for everybody. Their formative years, for many people, seem like a dreary waste of time. And their lives seem to be tragically headed nowhere fast. And that process starts very early on. I mean, I see that where I live here. Kids in the local school, that's an okay school, state school, but it's fine enough, and there are possibilities to move on from there. But for most young people, they don't see that path as being particularly clear. So before they know it, they're settled in and repeating the lives of their parents. But to be honest, living here has made me reflect, I suppose, to what extent that was true for me and my peers. We had this life that was mapped out for us. There were expectations of what you would do and where you were going to go. And when that structure was removed and you'd started working, you'd settled into your first serious job, it was amazing how time would slip by. I think for a lot of people today, that is what sort of happens to them. You start this job and time drifts by, and before you know it, decades are under the carpet, and you're not sure how you got where you did. And it's fine, because if, like me, you'd settled into a reasonably happy sort of job, you were, in general, you looked forward to each day, and you were doing something that was, at least to some degree, purposeful. Well, that's fine. That is just, it seems, the way life is. And as much as I was a bit of a sort of an alternative thinker, sort of a rebel, not a rebel in the badly behaved way, but maybe a little bit anti-establishment in the way I was thinking. The fact is that I quickly settled in, once I'd started teaching, into the establishment. And it reached a point, and I remember this very clearly, working at St. Paul's. It was our annual prize giving, and the speech was just interminable. And my mind was wandering, because I knew I was in there for the long haul. This guy wasn't going to do 10 minutes and then sit down to some polite applause. I got to thinking, and it struck me that a number of very interesting dates would come together at the same time. I would complete 25 years at St. Paul's School, the year I turned 60, and in the school's 100th anniversary. I was like, that was more than a coincidence. That was my life mapped out. Well, a few years later, I found myself at 47, retired, living here in the northeast of Brazil, having abandoned the teaching profession. So, yes, that wasn't how my life turned out. But at the time, it was wonderfully comforting, the thought that, I would have this glorious 25-year teaching career at school where, frankly, I was held in good regard and got on well with people. So 25 years there would have been celebrated. My 60th, the year I retired, and the school's centenary. It really did seem like a fantastic possibility, and I was ready for that, to just keep on grinding towards that day. But lately I've been thinking, I've spoken about this at length, how the strange serendipitous way that life twists you in a different direction. But perhaps you're sitting there and that isn't your story. You find yourself wondering where all the time has gone. I think it's a valuable exercise, and actually I'd encourage you to do it. Sit down and think when the last sort of rite of passage shift came in your life. The way moving from primary school to starting your first day in senior school, or your first day at university, first day on a new job, your first day in the working world, actually. When was the last time you had that sort of shift? And the time before that? I think when you do that, it's quite interesting to say, well, okay, so I spent 12 years doing this particular job in this particular institution, but you probably haven't been standing still. What have you been doing? What are the big accomplishments? The maybe not as obvious shifts in your life as a change from one educational phase to another, or starting life in the working world. But there probably are big shifts. When I was at St. Paul's, it was 12 and a half years, but I suppose the biggest single shift for me, and it wasn't taking on positions of responsibility, because for a start I'd done that before at my previous school. And as big as those changes were, they were, to some degree, just gently building on what I'd done before. No, my biggest shift was buying an apartment and starting to live with someone. That's something, I'd been in house shares before, but they were house shares where you each had your room and you split the costs. But in 2008, when I moved into the first apartment that I bought, I was 41. I also started living with my girlfriend and now my wife. And we've been together for a few years. So, if you've been together for 2.5 years, moving in is a sensible sort of step. But it was an enormous leap for me. And that came 6 years into my time in Brazil. I think it's an interesting it's an interesting exercise. It's worth giving it a few hours and actually putting pen to paper, sort of. And I've done this, and it is fascinating. Sort of mark out the passage of time in terms of these kinds of rites of passage moments, and look at how you've changed and what you've accomplished. Of course, there is a risk. You might sit down and start doing this and realise that actually nothing much has changed for 10, 12, 15 years. And then perhaps there's a message to you, a call to adventure. Give it a try. Anyway, that's it for this week. Certainly in the gallery a bit later on today. I think I'll move into the garden. Until then, and until the next time, from a sunny Brazil, well, overcast Brazil, ciao.